Okay, I want to start off by making it clear that I don't think the only role for archaeology in the 21st century is to combat anti-science. I just think it is an important role we have to play as a bridge between sciences and the liberal arts, and a bridge between the past, present, and future. Finally, throughout this presentation, I'm going to be talking a lot about the Neolithic of Britain. My area of research is Neolithic Orkney. I'm becoming more familiar with Ontario archaeology, but I don't know it well enough to do this presentation based on solely local archaeology. So you'll have to forgive me. The ideas and concepts are still applicable to all archaeology. Okay, now back to the topic at hand. Here is what I plan to talk to you about today. I want to talk about some of the challenges in archaeology. I want to give you just some context about the modern or contemporary rise of pseudo-archaeology. From there, I want to discuss some of the established techniques for confronting disinformation, anti-science, and pseudo-archaeology, while simultaneously discussing how we, as archaeologists, and I'm guilty of this too, unintentionally reinforce pseudo-archaeological tropes. Finally, I want to look at some of the ways some of these issues have been dealt with in Orkney, Scotland, and what we can learn from that. Finally, I want to tie it all back together and leave you with some ideas of how we might move forward as a discipline, not just in combating anti-science, but also in addressing some of the other issues I raised at the beginning. Okay, when I developed this session, back when it seemed like we weren't going to have enough sessions for this in the symposium, I wanted to get some sort of discussion going that allowed me to discuss archaeological knowledge production in an era when so much information is consumed through video and social media, and how we as archaeologists had a responsibility to ensure that the knowledge we produce and the information about the past we accumulate was accessible to local communities and in a format that was easily consumed. And thank you, Jamie, for your wonderful presentation that did actually address just that. I was thinking I'd talk about things like how we give credit to or cite where the knowledge we share virtually came from. How do we peer review recorded video publications or blogs or social media posts? How do we sort the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, for our audiences, our consumers? Essentially, how do we assert our archaeological authority? Now, as I would really enjoy having this conversation, it would likely bore the heck out of most people, and it would be extremely technical. I also realized that what I was concerned with was part of a number of interrelated challenges that archaeology faces in the 21st century. There are more archaeologists doing more archaeology and creating more and better data than ever before. This creates a massive data management challenge. I would argue that archaeology is, at best, overwhelmed by the implications of this massive increase in data, and at worst, intentionally avoiding grappling with it. There are threats to cultural heritage from development, yes, but also from larger threats posed by climate change. The way we publish our archaeological findings is rapidly changing, with open access becoming an increasing requirement, and a greater availability of non traditional publication mediums, such as social media, blogs, podcasts, videos, becoming more popular. As always, we still face significant funding challenges in all sectors of archaeology, with more and more of us fighting for a seemingly finite resource. These challenges are not helped by dwindling public support and engagement that is reflected in the numbers and age of members in heritage organizations across the board, with very few exceptions. Archaeology is also finally addressing the legacy of colonialism and its role within colonial structures. Decolonization is an uncomfortable process and one that many resist engaging with. So rather than trying to address all these big challenges, I decided to focus on this presentation on one piece of a much larger puzzle: combating pseudo-archaeology and the sway it holds over the public. Let's start by trying to understand the origins of modern or contemporary pseudo-archaeology. To do that, we first have to understand that pseudo-archaeology is inherently racist. This has amply been shown by Stephanie Helmhofer, whose research to the topic is absolutely brilliant, and who earlier this month published an article on sapiens.org entitled "Did Aliens Build the Pyramids and Other Racist Theories?" I do not claim to be an expert on the topic of pseudo-archaeology, and I owe a lot to people like Stephanie who clearly are. To set the stage for the emergence of pseudo-archaeology, we have to understand that archaeology was part of colonial discourse, and that much of the research in the 19th and early 20th centuries not only promoted racist theories, but was also aimed at trying to prove racist theories. Early theories of diffusionism and hyperdiffusionism and even the culture history approach to archaeology were all premised on racist notions of superior people spreading superior technology. This is not to say that diffusion didn't happen, but that the reasons for it were not due to the superiority of one race or culture over another. It should be no surprise that modern pseudo-archaeology emerged around the same time as the civil rights movement. People were not ready to give up their racist notions of the past, and pseudo-archaeology provided support for their beliefs. Simultaneously, archaeology was going through its own social upheaval with the advent of radiocarbon dating in 1949 by Willard Libby, who was then awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1960 for its impact. The introduction of absolute dating directly challenged many archaeological theories based on racist perceptions of the past, and many archaeologists had difficulty accepting its early results. Particularly notions of evolution, the idea that knowledge, skills, and technology was lost by inferior cultures after it was initially brought to them, was very quickly upturned by radiocarbon dating. It is also pretty clear how groups of people who so it is pretty clear that how groups of people who wanted to hold onto racist ideas of the past split from archaeology in the 1950s and 60s. But where did aliens come from? That is interesting. The idea of aliens and the thought that they might inhabit other worlds has a long history. By the 18th century, the idea was a matter of real debate, and it was widely accepted that alien civilizations existed. The first reports of flying ships began in the 19th century. They were claiming to see sailing ships and steam-powered ships in the sky. However, it was in the summer of 1947 that UFOs attributed to extraterrestrials really took off, so to speak. In June, a pilot named Kenneth Arnold detoured in search of for a downed Marine Corps aircraft near Mount Rainier in Washington state and claimed that he spotted 9 objects flying near him in formation. When describing how they flew, he said, and I quote, "They flew like a saucer would if you skipped it across water." Soon newspapers were printing headlines about flying saucers, and within 6 weeks, a Gallup poll discovered that 90% of Americans had heard the term. At the same time, in late June or early July of 1947, William Brazel found, and I quote, "a large area of bright wreckage made up of rubber strips, tinfoil, a rather tough paper, and sticks at the J.B. Foster Ranch in Lincoln County, New Mexico, near Roswell." This was the start of the UFO and alien craze. In Britain, early radar often seemed to confirm sightings, leading them to scramble fighter planes to investigate. But these confirmations can be attributed to the nature of early radar systems and dropped off significantly as technology improved. Whether the ease at which believing in UFOs and aliens is related to anxiety spurred by the Cold War, or to the concurrent rise of science fiction writing, or some other factor, is a matter of some debate. However, by 1952, the CIA was discussing using the phenomenon for psychological warfare purposes. The point is that it is in this overall context that the modern fixation on pseudo-archaeology emerged. Eric von Daniken's book Chariots of the Gods was published in 1968 and really pulled together all these threads that existed within society and tied it to archaeology and a study of the past. Really, it played on some of the circumstances that archaeology had yet to explain, with radiocarbon dating and scientific method being applied at the beginning of new archaeology. So, approaches to effectively combating pseudo-archaeology. Several recent studies in psychology and behavioral sciences have recently tested methods for combating misinformation and disinformation. Once again, this isn't my area of research or my area of specialty, but I think it is worth covering at least briefly and trying to provide an example of what I am talking about. Research indicates that the most effective approach are techniques of so-called inoculation, which aims to help people identify methods commonly used to spread falsehoods before they are exposed to misinformation. Basically, teaching people early on how to spot the techniques and methods used in pseudo-archaeology. The reason this is more effective is that it is proactive versus reactive. The other techniques require addressing a pre-existing belief rather than preventing people from being swayed by them in the first place. In the case of Stonehenge, pseudo-archaeologists often make a lot out of archaeologists not knowing precisely how the stones were moved or its exact purpose. They exploit the unknowns and turn it into a mystery, and the explanation they have is one that archaeologists haven't or won't consider. However, we as archaeologists also feed on the same mystery for funding, applications, and for publications. We use it to attract visitors and to encourage interest in the time period, site, or archaeology more broadly. We basically use the same techniques of making sensational claims and providing answers to mysteries or decoding secrets to captivate public audiences and sometimes students. This is highly problematic and we need to stop. Just to note, I am published in one of the publications in the top right of the screen, so I am not perfect at this myself. It is really easy and tempting to do. We want people to be enthusiastic about our subjects. The reality is of Stonehenge is that that we don't know the technique of how they moved the stone. The real question is why we don't know how they were moved. That is pretty simple. Either they used a technique that left no evidence of the movement and elevation of the stones, or we haven't found that evidence yet. We have several ideas of how they could have been moved. We just don't know which they used. There is no question that people moved them and that they had the technology to move the stones and erect the monument. We know where they came from. We even know the precise quarry and place in the quarry for some of the stones. We know some of the stones were dressed at Stonehenge. We have found the chips taken off the stones and the hammer stones they used to do it with. There isn't a mystery here or a secret. The technique rebuttal strategy to combat disinformation and misinformation is essentially the same thing. You want to go after the strategy used by pseudo-archaeology head on. So you might attack something like the cherry picking technique. Typically for Stonehenge, pseudo-archaeology cherry picks, trying to call the site out as unique and the weight of the stones unique. Stonehenge is both unique and not. It is one of dozens, if not hundreds of stone circles across Britain, which vary greatly in size and style. The weight of the stones is by no means unique either. The largest stone at Stonehenge, the heel stone, weighs approximately 30 tons. Some of the stones at nearby Avebury weigh in at 40 tons. For perspective, the largest portal tomb, or dolmen, similar to the one pictured here, has a capstone weighing 150 tons and was built roughly 1,500 years before Stonehenge in 4000 BC. The monument is located in Carlow, Ireland, and is known as Brownshill Dolmen. Erected even earlier, around 4700 BC, is the Grand Menhir Brise from Brittany, France, which weighed in at roughly 330 tons and broke when it was erected because the stone couldn't hold its own weight. That is 10 times heavier than the heaviest stone at Stonehenge. But nobody in pseudo-archaeology is asking about aliens moving the Grand Menhir Brise. It's just not part of the common knowledge of stuff. The point is that there is a pattern of moving and erecting heavy stones during the Neolithic across Atlantic Europe. Stonehenge is actually one of the later monuments and doesn't have anywhere near the heaviest stones. People were really good and very dedicated to creating these stone monuments. We can also see a lot of monuments of varying size and how people learned and practiced this activity, from smaller monuments that no one would question as having been built by people to extremely massive undertakings like the Grand Menhir Brise. By focusing so much research on Stonehenge and privileging it, we aid pseudo-archaeology, which then points to the site as unique and special and requiring an extraordinary explanation. Finally, we have the topic rebuttal technique. So for Stonehenge, let's say someone is talking about it being built by aliens. My first question might be something like, would aliens flew across the galaxy make basic mistakes measuring when erecting something like Stonehenge? The obvious answer is no. If they did, would they not just go get a new stone to replace it? Well, the builders of Stonehenge did make mistakes. They cut holes in the lintels, bits that go across the top of the stones, to stick onto the points of the top of the standing erect stones. This is a woodworking technique, but applied to stone. Well, they didn't measure correctly on it. Well, they didn't measure correctly on at least one of the lintels and had to flip it over and try again. This is the epitome of humanity. Cut twice, measure once. Instead of measure twice, cut once. Just imagine how frustrating that would have been after having moved the stone, dressed it, drilled the hole in it, raised it up, only to find out it didn't fit, and doing all of this with only stone tools. I mean, talk about drama here. As a brief side note, and please ask me about it later, I really want to get us to get away from discussing sites like Stonehenge's calendars or having anything to do with it. It makes no sense, and it also doesn't give the people of the time enough credit for what they were actually doing. Lessons from the heart of Neolithic Orkney. Okay, lessons from Orkney. Listed on this slide are a number of documents and institutions that are key to understanding how archaeology has been practiced over the past 25 years or so in Orkney. The documents outline the strategies that have been taken by archaeologists investigating Orkney. The institutions, by working together, have implemented those strategies. This has worked to inoculate the community against disinformation and mostly kept pseudo-archaeology at bay. I essentially have a whole chapter in my PhD dedicated to this history, so I have to keep it brief here. Key takeaway number one: find out what is there. Figure out what archaeology exists and involve the local community in doing so. In order to better manage the archaeology, the archaeologists needed to have a better understanding of what was there. The saying in Orkney is that it bleeds archaeology. Scratch the surface and you'll find something. The preservation is just that unreal. To do this, the people in Orkney implemented a program of geophysical survey across the entire inner buffer of the World Heritage Site. They have also implemented a community outreach program that invites local community members to help them complete pedestrian, known as field walking there, surveys of recently plowed fields with the permission and sometimes participation of local landowners. The results have been outstanding. Key takeaway two: be transparent. The documents outline what is and isn't known about the archaeology in Orkney and Scotland more broadly, and identifies areas requiring further research. This not only allows funding bodies to see the value of the work that is being proposed, but it also shows the public what archaeologists are actually doing and trying to achieve. Proponents and developers are also able to see the value of the work being done and support it, and the support it gets from the community, and are more likely to support the research when a project turns up something of archaeological value. The value is more concrete to people when it isn't discussed in vague language intended to encompass a wide variety of scenarios. Finally, the documents were created in consultation with the local communities and have been exceptionally valuable in helping drive local interest and engagement. We need these documents here in Ontario, and has been shown in Orkney, we need to plan ahead for the need to update them on a regular basis as priorities change. Key takeaway number three: build on what you have. Orkney College was founded several years before the inscription of the World Heritage Site, which happened in 1999. At the time, Orkney College was essentially a small community college polytechnic. It was incorporated in the University of Highlands and Islands in 2001. When the World Heritage Site was inscribed, there were only 3 archaeologists living and working in Orkney full time. Now there are probably almost 30. Archaeology exploded with the World Heritage Site designation. The key to this growth was building on the existing momentum and working with everyone involved. It certainly helped that the county archaeologist, who was essentially the planning authority for the county, worked well with the only lecturer in archaeology at the university and the first real archaeologist for hire, so doing commercial archaeology based in the area, in decades. They also worked well with other interested academics from across Britain. Um, Commercial Archaeology Planning Authority and the university remained deeply entwined, and UHI has become one of the best archaeology programs in Britain, with top researchers moving there to take up professorships. There really is nowhere else like it. Key takeaway number 4: get what you're doing out there. The research done in Orkney is published in every medium imaginable: social media, blogs, podcasts, videos, lectures, and peer-reviewed articles and edited volumes. The archaeologists produce in mediums that can be consumed by audiences, not just other archaeologists. Key takeaway 5: involve the community and be open to the public. Since 2005, excavations at the Nessa Brodgar have featured open days with public tours. This year, before COVID, the year before COVID struck, they had over 200,000 visitors to the site. They are taking their time with the site, getting the excavation done right, but they do so mainly through donations from the public. It also helps that the lead archaeologist, Nick Card, lives on the site. Literally, his house is part of the site. These types of excavations really provide an opportunity for the public to see what we as archaeologists do and gives them a better sense of its importance and value. Hiding away in a field under a tent doesn't do the public or the discipline any good. If you have a site that warrants it, provide open days, site tours, and really engage with the public. Initially, it can be disappointing. The first year I was at the Ness, they maybe had 200 visitors over the course of 6 weeks. Just over a couple years ago, they had 100 times that with over 200,000. It takes time to build up the momentum. Finally, we have reached the end. Time for some quick conclusions. I have just a minute left. We have to stop ignoring pseudo-archaeology and take it head on. And to do so, we have to also recognize how we are part of it. The only way to do so, in my opinion, is to really understand where it came from and our own history as a discipline. Social media, video recording, podcasts are the way of the future. We need to be able to write for these. We need to figure out how to validate the knowledge we put out through these mediums. Community involvement is key. We can't just keep hiding in our bubble. We have to get people involved. We have to be transparent in what we are doing. For those of you who worry about looting, UNESCO has argued that community involvement is the best way to prevent looting. When the community cares, they report people doing things they shouldn't. They confront them. When they are invested in the preservation, things actually get preserved and protected. Finally, we really need to define our research goals and develop strategies for achieving them and ways of measuring that achievement. I'm sure we're very much close to out of time. I want to thank you for listening and thank the people in Orkney who helped me with my research there. And there are way too many for me to name at this point. All right, and I will stop sharing. And I'm back. There's 5 seconds, which means right on time amazingly, which is pretty good. So as I'm finishing up here, I want to now welcome up onto the stage Dr. Robert Park, who will be presenting our next paper, Archaeology, the Once and Future Discipline. Hopefully it follows well from my talk itself. Welcome, Dr. Park.
Okay, I'm looking rather fuzzy there for some reason. Let me just figure out how to share.
Hello, Dr. Park. Can you please click unmute your camera and microphone to come back up on stage?
I'm here. We'll get Robert Park back up here, I swear. And Jared did ask me a question in there, so.
Thank you for your patience, everybody. Dr. Park, please click join when you see the invite. We'll get this sorted out, folks.
This is the last one in this session, and then we'll go to break, so.
While I'm trying to get Dr. Park up, Chris, I did have a question for you, just to kill some time. What challenges did you have working on a designated World Heritage Site?
So I've worked on a couple of them. I worked on the Heart of Neolithic Orkney World Heritage Site, and I worked in the Stonehenge World Heritage Site. There's a lot of bureaucratic administration that goes through with working on a World Heritage Site. You can't just go and do it. By working with big teams of really well-known, well-qualified archaeologists, it helps a lot. Because you have to get in the funding applications, get in the permit applications. You have to have a really solid research strategy and research agenda. You can't just go in there saying, I want to do some archaeology here. You have to have a goal of what you're going to achieve, how you're going to achieve it, how much digging you have to do to achieve that, why it requires that many units in that much area to excavate. It's really about planning ahead and being clear about what your objectives are and how you are going to achieve those objectives. And that's really the important part about working on World Heritage sites, like Stonehenge or up in Orkney, is having that agenda going.
Thank you, Chris. In the meantime, Robert, if you could hear me, I've sent you a private message to please refresh your screen. And Chris, there's also a comment in the chat feature you may wish to address.
Okay. Oh. Yes, Stephen, we definitely do need to make a clear the differences between pseudo-archaeology and the integration of traditional knowledge. They are not the same thing. And we really do need to make sure that is clear. They are not the same thing. They're, in some ways, they have come from a similar point of where archaeology lost touch with other ways of thinking about the world, which they share some things in common, but they are not the same thing. They are not based on the same thing. They come from very different places. That they share the similarity in that we have disenfranchised their views, one for good reason because they're racist, the other because we don't know how to think about things from different perspectives, and we are really self-regulating and self-promoting in that sense. We kind of regulate ourselves and say that we are the only ones who know what we're talking about, which is problematic.
Thank you, Chris. We seem to have lost Dr. Robert Park. I'll keep trying to see if he logs back in. In the meantime, there are a few questions from for Jamie. Perhaps I could invite Jamie back on stage.
Sure.
Oh, Jamie's no longer in the platform.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh.
Perhaps there's also a question from Heather.
Yes, there is a question also in here from Fawn. This is a question: is there any difference between pseudo-archaeology and pseudo-science in archaeology? Pseudo-archaeology is more encompassing than pseudo-science. Pseudo-science is trying to really be specific and claim some relationship to science, and pseudo-archaeology is a more encompassing term. I don't know how you be pseudo-scientific about anything, so it's a way to try and do that. But Heather, you can answer one of the other questions here.
I did not see the question that was for me.
Heather, if you look to the top right of the screen in the Q&A section, there's a question from Tien. It's almost a jumping off question from you, Heather, but have you worked with the program Spatial?
I have not. Sorry, I thought that was still a question for Jamie. It's not a program that I have seen before, but I have Googled it now, and I haven't. I will. It's something that I will look into, but I'm not sure it's exactly what I'm looking for.
Thank you for the clarification, Tien. You're right. It was for Jamie, but Jamie is no longer in our session right now.
So.
All right. Have we gotten Robert back?
No, unfortunately, he's not back in the platform. So, Chris, we could either, for the next 12 minutes, try to get him up online. You can answer some more questions, or we could go back to the networking component just for another 12 minutes or so. But
I think that, we might as well go back to that networking one. Why don't we stay in here for another 2 minutes, 30 seconds, see if Robert comes back. And otherwise, we'll head into the networking and the break a little early, and give people a chance to kind of interact for a bit.
Sure. Chris, in the meantime, there is a question from Scott. If you would like to address that in the general chat, please.
All right.
Terms. Has anyone noticed the term casual historian, the humanities equivalent of pseudo-archaeology?
That is not one I have come across. As I said, pseudo-archaeology in this kind of realm of stuff is not my area of expertise. It was just an area that interests me because I'm interested in how we produce knowledge as archaeologists, how we know what we know. That is really what I care about the most. And pseudo-archaeology is just one of those side topics that comes up a lot because I care about how we know what we know and how we validate that knowledge. And so it's not a term I have come up with, but I might have to look into it some. So I will. Got like another minute here. I will try and keep monitoring stuff. So usually I'm not so good at timing it and getting it done right on time. I'm impressed.
You're doing a great job, Chris. So unfortunately, folks, we do not have Robert W. Park on the call. Yeah.
Yep. I think we might as well just head on back into that networking mode and have our break now. It gives us 30 minutes. We'll be back at 10:20 to be able to do more on this.
Thank you very much.
It'll be me again, almost.
Thank you. Stand by.